Brachim Habayim, welcome to Friends of Israel around the United States, around Israel, indeed around the world. We are back here, all of our colleagues at America-Israel Friendship League, doing our best to keep you informed, to keep you calm and understanding the extraordinary efforts that are underway following the massacre of October 7th and the Gaza war, which has broken out in the region in response. We all have heavy hearts at the moment, and we know that sometimes being together helps us understand and helps us cope with these very, very difficult times. So we're grateful that you're here with us on this Sunday. We've been doing this twice a week, and we'll continue to bring you different perspectives, today focusing on international legal aspects of the armed conflict. And we think that this will be an important aspect of understanding the conflict going forward. I do want to begin with an opportunity for the audience to share a thought, a prayer, a concern on behalf of the hostages who we know are living through a special hell at the moment, and those who are in harm's way trying to free them as we speak. So for those of you that want to take the opportunity just to share a thought in the chat, we want to give you that opportunity to do that as a virtual community and recognize that at this moment, tremendous bravery and resources are being expended in order to help free those individuals. I want to now turn the focus of this program to international human rights, humanitarian law, war of conflict. We brought with you today an incredible expert, Colonel Pnina Sharvit Baruch. She is a senior research fellow at the Law and National Security in the Israel on Law and National Security at the Israel Institute for National Security Studies. She's also the vice president of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, an organization I once belonged to many years ago. Good to know that it's still active and vibrant. She is also a founding member of the Forum Dvorah, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security. In 2009, she retired after 20 years in the International Law Department of the Israel Defense Forces, where she was the head of the department in 2003. She has been teaching in various law faculties at Tel Aviv University and the National Security College ever since. And today, she has offered her precious time away from family, away from other responsibilities, to share with us, first of all, an overview of how international law relates to the current conflict. She has dealt with this during her tenure as an active advisor to the IDF during times of conflict. So she has a great deal of experience having done that firsthand, and we will benefit first from this sort of briefing for this group to be able to understand the legal aspects of what people are seeing, sometimes with words and terms being thrown out rather loosely. We'll have an understanding, and then we will have an opportunity, thanks to Colonel Sharvit Baruch, to really discuss any questions you may have that may be unclear, as again, this is meant to be informative and to provide a basis, not for you to become an international lawyer, but rather for you to be able to understand the legal implications of many aspects of this that really only experts like Colonel Baruch really fully understand. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you. We're hopeful you get to give your full presentation. We know that you and everybody else in Gush Dan, and frankly in the rest of Israel, for at least the past couple of weeks, if not certainly before that for many in the South and elsewhere in Israel, live in a constant threat of terror that you've had to get used to. I don't know if one can fully get used to the kind of sirens and descending to bomb shelters that is a part of Israeli life at the moment. But nonetheless, we're grateful you're here, and we hope that you have not only your full hour, but hopefully the full rest of the night to be able to be with your family.
So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Obi, for making the connection. Yes, I was a legal advisor. I was 20 years in the International Law Department. I was involved, by the way, in all the peace negotiations with the Palestinians. I was a legal advisor in the Oslo Accords and the interim agreement. I was a legal advisor in Paris on the Paris Protocol in 94, and afterwards in the interim agreement on the civilian issues in 95, and been involved since then in trying to find a peaceful resolution of the conflict, including track 2s after I retired. But I also was in charge of the legal advice on armed conflict, on the laws of armed conflict. I was actually the commander of all the legal advisors on operational issues, operational legal advisors to the commanders in the IDF. Worked also between operations, on preparations, on giving the legal aspects for different measures, means, targets, and incorporating the laws into the commands. And then during operations, we had 24/7 legal advisors involved. And I was also, of course, involved in decisions themselves. So I was a legal advisor in a cost-led operation, which was the December 2008, January 2009. And ever since, I've been writing on these topics. And I want to start by saying, and this is relevant to that what we are facing today in Israel, and I know that you've already heard a few people, so I won't repeat it too much, but it's something different. This is the worst crisis we've had since I think since the establishment of the State of Israel. This is worse than the 1973 war. And I was only 6 in 1973 war, but from people that do remember it and from people that analyzed it, the threat today is very significant, and the fact that the surprise and the impact and the fact that the civilians were targeted and the level of brutality and cruelty altogether, I think are unprecedented, and also the threat that we are facing from all around, from the different fronts, is also something that is different from all the operations that we've had in recent years that were focused mainly on the Gaza Strip. So I think we have to understand, or just Lebanon. So we have this very complex threat, and it is relevant when we are also looking at the legal aspect. So let me dive into the legal aspects. Just a word about what Hamas did, which of course I don't think I need to elaborate, especially not to this audience. Of course, what they did was the worst kind of war crimes, crimes against humanity, even amounts to genocide, if you look at the definition of genocide. And this is atrocities. What they did was atrocities, and I know you already got lectures that this was pre-planned. They found on bodies of some of the terrorists that the plan was to enter the civilian villages and to torture and murder and butcher families. It wasn't just at the heat of the moment. It's also important to understand. And this brings us to the Israeli reaction, which I will focus on, because the question is, okay, so they did terrible things. Does that mean that Israel doesn't have to abide by the law? So the short answer is no, that doesn't mean that. There is no principle of reciprocity in international IHL, International Humanitarian Law, or laws of armed conflict. It's the same thing, by the way. If somebody says LOAC, laws of armed conflict, or laws of war, or international humanitarian law, it's the same thing. It's just different names to the same concept. Anyway, there's no principle of proportionality. There's no concept of reciprocity. So it means that even if they brutally broke every law that exists, doesn't mean that Israel doesn't have to abide by the law. And this is also, I think, part of our rationale, our identity as law-abiding state, as a member of the Western world of our moral values. And I don't think we want to become our enemies and lose this moral identity. So the laws apply, but now let's see what do the laws say. And then the accusation is what Israel is doing. It's first of all, it's acting out of revenge, and it's aiming at the civilians to make the civilians in Gaza suffer, and it is a war crime, or others would say, oh, it's mainly disproportionate, even if it is okay to, you have a right to self-defense, and it's okay to target the Hamas, but what is happening there with thousands of civilian casualties on the Palestinian side is disproportionate, and that's again a war crime. So I want to explain the concept of the law and explain why this is not the case. So when we talk of the laws of armed conflict, it's actually quite simple. You don't need a lawyer just to understand these principles. There are two principles and another rule that are relevant. One principle is the principle of distinction. The second is the principle of proportionality, and there's an obligation to take feasible precautions. So let me start with the principle of distinction. The principle of distinction says that you are not allowed to, or it is prohibited to target civilians and civilian objects. What you are allowed is just to target military objectives and combatants of the enemy. Combatants includes also civilians that are actively participating in the hostilities. So if it's combatants or civilians that are actively participating in hostilities or military objectives, then you can direct you can target them, you can direct the attack against them, and not against civilians and civilian objects. But what we need to understand is that according to the laws of armed conflict, the definition of a military objective includes any object, even if it's a civilian object, that by its nature, location, purpose, or use makes a significant or is part of adds to the military activity of the enemy. And this means that if the Hamas is using civilian buildings, operating from there, or even if their location is relevant for its military activities, then this becomes a lawful military target. And the situation in Gaza is that the Hamas, almost all of its activity, maybe not 100%, but 90%, and also the activity of the Islamic Jihad and the other terrorist organization, all this activity is carried out from within civilian infrastructure and from beneath civilian infrastructure. This means homes and schools and mosques and hospitals, any civilian infrastructure. So, and I think this is even not contested. There's so much evidence about that. And recently, the IDF spokesman has released more specific evidence. So if anybody argues about the facts, there's a lot of evidence to prove this. And this means that when Israel is trying to target, is aiming its attacks at the military infrastructure of the Hamas, which is a legitimate military objective, what we see is civilian buildings that are being destroyed. But this does not mean that this is not a lawful attack and that does not fulfill the principle of distinction. Okay, so this is one main object. Israel is not targeting civilians. It's not the aim of the attack. It is targeting military objectives. The idea, the purpose of our operation is to eliminate or at least degrade the military capabilities of the Hamas. To do that, we have to attack this military infrastructure that is within and beneath these civilian buildings. So that's the first element that has to be understood. This is not the end of the story, because then we have the second principle, because the principle of proportionality. Because even when you are attacking a lawful military objective, you still have to carry out a balance between the military advantage that you expect from this attack of this target and the collateral damage, the anticipated collateral damage to civilians and civilian objects from the attack. And if the anticipated collateral damage to civilians is expected to be excessive in relation to the military advantage, then the attack is not proportionate and unlawful. So let me repeat that. So you have to balance. You have to look, what is the military advantage? what is the anticipated collateral damage. And if this anticipated collateral damage is excessive, then it is not proportionate. It means that the law gives the more weight actually to the military advantage, because only if the collateral damage is excessive does it make the attack unlawful, not proportionate and unlawful. And here we have to understand a few things. First of all, that means that even extensive civilian harm to civilians is not necessarily unlawful. We're not talking about extensive, we're talking about excessive. And secondly, it also means that even if you attack a target knowing that civilians might get killed, innocent civilians, that doesn't mean under the laws of armed conflict that the attack is unlawful. There's no obligation, legal obligation, to avoid any civilian casualties. And these rules that I'm saying, these are rules that are accepted by everyone. This is in the manual of the international, of the ICRC, the Red Cross, the International Red Cross. It is, of course, in the manual on laws of war of the Department of Defense of the US, and any expert would say this. I'm not saying something, this is not an Israeli position. This is the law as accepted by all experts on this topic. So now when we look at our circumstances now, what makes this war different than previous operations, we always had this challenge of fighting, of conducting attacks inside a civilian area, because the Hamas, as I said, uses the civilian infrastructure. It also uses the civilians as shields. It prevents them from leaving. So we have civilians there. We know that we have civilians there. We try to take precautions. I said there's another obligation to take precautions. So to give feasible precautions in order to minimize harm to civilians. The precautions are the ones that are feasible. So we have to look at the circumstances. So Israel, for example, gives warning people, telling them leave the area, go south, in order to minimize harm. You don't have a legal obligation to give individual warnings to every person. There's no such legal obligation. Israel did it in the past because it could, because it wanted to minimize, but it's not a legal obligation. The legal obligation is much more general. So we give the precautions, we warn the people, but still civilians remain there. And then we have to do this balance. And here, and this is the main difference from the past, the military advantage side of it is much, much heavier than it was in the past. We understood also in the past that Hamas is a fierce enemy, the terror organization, it is out, it wants to destroy Israel, but we didn't estimate how powerful it is. We did estimate maybe the hatred. Even there, I think there was a misconception. We thought that the Hamas could be pragmatic, could maybe care for the Palestinians in Gaza. We were giving the Hamas a lot of concessions, more Palestinians coming in from Gaza to work in Israel. There was much more transit and of exchange of goods. The economy was better. But now we understood that was a misconception. The Hamas cared nothing about the well-being of the Palestinians in Gaza. But the main mistake also was the capabilities. We didn't estimate the capabilities. What we got on the 7th of October was a shock of how sophisticated, how much equipment they have, supported, by the way, by Iran and the axis of Iran in coordination. They have coordination with Hezbollah and others. And now we understand that the Hamas poses a huge threat to Israel. At the moment, we cannot live in the southern part of Israel near the Gaza Strip. This area has been evacuated. It's either the villages have been destroyed, but even those that haven't been destroyed are evacuated, and nobody will go back there as long as the Hamas continues to pose such a threat, because we understand that this is an existential threat, at least to this part of the country. This means that we have to get rid of this military threat. In order to do that, we have to eliminate the military capabilities of the Hamas. And in order to do that, we have to go after each part of this infrastructure, each target, and get rid of it in order to get to this overall outcome. And this means that there is huge military advantage. And because this military advantage is so heavy, it has such weight, it means that even if the collateral damage to civilians, the expected one, could be extensive, could include a considerable number of casualties, we don't want these casualties to happen, but that doesn't mean that it is disproportionate, and that doesn't mean that it is an unlawful attack. And this is the laws, and this is very important to emphasize when people try to say that this is a war crime just because there are many civilian casualties on the Palestinian side. And it's also important to say what are the alternatives, because there's another principle of military necessity. Is there an alternative to the use of force? And there's no alternative to the use of force. There is one alternative, but there's no alternative from the Israeli side to this use of force, because we have to eliminate the threat of Hamas. The only alternative, the non-forcible alternative, the way to spare the lives of civilians in Gaza, there is such a way. And that is if the Hamas surrenders. The Hamas has the key. If it cares about the civilians in Gaza, it can surrender. Free all the hostages immediately, give up their weapons, surrender their leaders, and then Israel will stop its attacks. So there is a way out. The way out is not that Israel will surrender and say, okay, we surrender. You can come and conquer Israel, which is the aim of the Hamas. But the Hamas can surrender and stop the conflict at any time. I want to add another component, and I will end by that, to the military advantage, because I focused until now on the Hamas, and I think just with the Hamas already, this means that the proportionate analysis means that it is just legal, at least, even to have a significant number of civilian casualties. But what we have to add is another element, which is also very important when we look at the military advantage, and that the threat is not just the threat of Hamas. The threat at the moment to Israel is that if Israel is perceived as weak, if Israel is perceived as it cannot overcome the Hamas, then all our other enemies, it's like being a wounded animal in the jungle. I mean, they will smell the blood. They are just waiting to see if the Hezbollah and Iran and Iran's proxies in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, we have already had missiles from Yemen against Israel that were intercepted by the US. If they evaluate that there is a chance to beat Israel, Israel is weak, then they will come to the kill. And this is completely an existential threat, and this is not me being dramatic. This is a threat that we are facing. It could be an existential threat if all these enemies come together. Thankfully, really, very thankfully, President Biden, the US administration are standing at our side. We have the aircraft carrier, which lets me sleep at night. But still, this is a huge threat. And this is an additional component when we look at the military advantage. The law doesn't require a state to commit suicide. Okay, it acknowledges the right of the state to act in self-defense. And when we act in self-defense, when you afterwards see, okay, and what does it mean? What can we do within this use of force within self-defense? We are operating within the confines of the laws of armed conflict. And I would say that any other country that would face a similar threat would be doing, well, any other democratic country would be doing exactly what Israel is doing, if not more, and non-democratic countries would have, of course, be doing much more. So I will stop here and open it up maybe for questions.
Well, not surprisingly, we have quite a few. So let me try to group a few together that are thematically close, so we can get a sense of the kind of things that people are looking at. I think I want to start with the area of the human shields. There are a number of questions that we have here that talk about what we now know, or at least has been identified, that many of the military operations, let alone the command and control infrastructure, have been placed in or under civilian facilities. So let me start with a very basic question. Is there law, international law, that governs what happens underground? I know there's law that governs what happens in the space and what happens above on the ground. Is there actually law that relates to, in the context of war, obviously, of what's happening underground?
It's the same principle. I mean, you still have to apply distinction and proportionality and precautions. Of course, when the use of the means that you are using, for example, in order to get to the tunnels that are underground, you might need to use heavier weapons or weapons that can cause more destruction. But then, since that's, again, the military objective, it's a lawful military target, that's the only way to get to it. So that makes it legitimate to use also stronger weapons, because I was saying there's the issue of precautions, feasible precautions. One of the precautions is to use accurate weapons as much as possible that will minimize harm to civilians. But of course, if the accurate weapon will not get you the military objective that you are pursuing, so you don't have any obligation to limit yourself to use a weapon that will not give you what you need to get militarily. So again, this could impact this kind of I would say tactical, or but it doesn't impact the law. The law is still the same law, whether we are fighting underground or overground.
Okay, now the question becomes, my friend Craig asked a pertinent question here. Hamas placing military operations under a civilian facility,
hospital, by the way.
Yeah. And in this case, specifically in a hospital, is that a war crime? And can that be pursued separately, or, you know, at this point, because it's not something that happened this happened a long time ago, that they did it. Could that be, or is there any case law on what it means, or examples where it is clear that you know, there will be evidence that's pretty clear that where that facility is that a war crime, and are there examples of ways to actually prosecute that proactively?
Yeah, it's a war crime. It's a war crime to use civilians as shields. It's a war crime. You have a war crime of taking passive precautions, of not operating from within the civilians and using them as shields. The problem is that it doesn't really help us. I mean, the Hamas is doing so many war crimes, intentionally attacking civilians, not to talk about brutality that they of what they did on the 7th of October is clearly war crimes. But it's not that they are really so worried about being prosecuted as war criminals. It's not that if they go out and around the world, and if Israel gets its hands on them and they are still alive, it can prosecute them for a lot of crimes. But again, it's not something that deters the Hamas. On the other hand, as I said before, the fact that it is a war crime doesn't relieve Israel from its obligation to still abide by the law.
Sure.
So, even if people are used as human shields, there is an exception. They say if somebody is a voluntary human shield, then that could be used as that could be a reason to say that that person becomes a lawful combatant, or a lawful is directly participating in hostilities and can be directly attacked for being a voluntary human shield. But it's very difficult to prove voluntary human shields, and usually, like in a hospital, you can't say that all the people in the hospital are voluntary human shields. So they are civilians. You'll have to take them into account in the proportionality analysis. Hospitals have a specific protection as a target, but you can also target a hospital if it is used by the enemy. But you need to give it a special warnings to stop this kind of action. But if they continue, even a hospital could be a legitimate target. Again, you would have to apply the proportionality, and the proportionality here, there would be many civilian casualties. It would be difficult. It's not an easy one. And again, beyond the level, I was talking all the time on the level of legality, there's the level of legitimacy. There's another layer of legitimacy. And here we know that even when we are doing things that are lawful, we are many times criticized as doing things that are illegitimate, and we need the international legitimacy, and especially we need the U.S. The legitimacy in the U.S. Because it is important for us to have our allies at our side.
Okay, so we have a number of questions here that relate to the status of Hamas as a terror group as opposed to a nation. And which laws will apply specifically to Hamas and its activities. And you may even need, there's a related question as to the status of Gaza. What is it considered under international law? And there are a whole host of questions we'll get into on the civilians in Gaza. But why don't we start there just so we're operating off the same information?
So the Hamas is a terrorist organization in Israel, in many other countries in the world, but it is also the de facto government that is governing the Gaza Strip. There's no contradiction. ISIS at a certain time was also controlling a territory. It was still a terrorist organization and still controlled the territory. So you can be both. The status of Gaza, and this is really important, this is a point I didn't get to, I knew to come up in the questions though. Gaza is not occupied by Israel. Okay, Israel has disengaged from the Gaza Strip in 2005, and the Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. Israel took out all the settlements that were there, all the military forces. I was actually involved in the disengagement and in the agreements that were concluded with the Palestinians on movement and access. We had specific arrangements, for example, to transfer all the hot houses that were in the settlement area in working condition. There was somebody who donated money so they can continue to develop them. The idea was that they could rule themselves, the Palestinians. This could be a test case. If it works well and they live nicely, then we could take this step also in the West Bank. Unfortunately, as I said, the Hamas took control, literally threw out the Fatah, literally because they threw Fatah people out of the windows in 2007. And since then, instead of investing in the development of Gaza, invested everything they got in the development of their military capabilities with one aim and one aim only, and that is to destroy the state of Israel, to destroy any chances of peace, by the way. They are not after a peaceful resolution of the conflict, if anybody had another idea. Israel does not have, to be considered an occupied territory, the test under international law is having effective control. Israel has no effective control in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't also control even all the external perimeter. It controls the borders between the Gaza Strip and Israel, yes, and the airspace and the sea, but there was an open border between Gaza and Egypt. So we didn't even control all the outside perimeter, and not that that is enough to be considered an occupation, but even if it were, we didn't control all of the perimeter. There were links, and Gaza was dependent on Israel when the disengagement started. So Israel continued to provide water and electricity, but this is not out of some legal obligation as an occupier, but more because they were dependent on us, so we continued. But this dependency, first of all, has diminished over the years. They have much less dependency on us in recent years. And anyway, again, we don't have any legal obligation as an occupier to provide them with anything. The only obligations that we have today towards the civilians in Gaza is those that a country has in an armed conflict situation towards the civilian population of the enemy. And this is very narrow and limited obligations.
We have a question from Ellen that I think is on a lot of people's minds at the moment. Is there law or an understanding about the forces now that are actually trying to free hostages? In other words, separate from whatever phase of this military operation we're in, there certainly, and I know you were you're quite aware of the hostage families and their understandable desire to see everything and anything happen to free their loved ones. And I'm wondering, does international law have a recognition that either proportionality or other concepts in the context of a freeing the hostage operation might be different than just general campaign of attrition or something?
Again, no, the principles are the same. The military advantage, again, of freeing hostages is, again, I think, a very significant one, especially when we know that this is such an issue that is also, again, perceived as also shedding, also our other enemies are looking at that, and Israeli population, and I think this is the basic obligation of a state towards its civilians. So that, again, would justify an operation that is aimed at that. Again, I think the collateral damage there could be significant and still not excessive. So again, it's just the formulas, the framework is the same one. But when you have different facts, of course, it reflects on the implementation, on what is the bottom line. So I think that's the fact that they have hostages. So an attempt to release hostages is a huge military advantage.
We have questions coming in from literally all over the world. I want to just acknowledge from Minnesota and Florida and Dallas, United Kingdom, Ontario, Amsterdam, Jerusalem, of course, Renana, Carmiel, Venice, California. The questions relate to both concern about civilian casualties, both on the Gaza side and on the Israel side. So can we talk a little bit about questions that are often raised in the international press and in the Israeli press as well, for that matter, about the current humanitarian aid issues? So there's a set of questions about, is Hamas held responsible for diverting fuel, food, supplies, etc., at a time when it could be supplying some or all of those needs to its local population? So that's question one. And then question two is, what are Israel's obligations in the current stage to be able to support humanitarian efforts in the current environment?
Yeah. So Israel, as I said before, is not an occupier. And I saw there was a question about an airport. The fact that Israel prevented an airport, actually there was an airport. I finalized the agreement on the airport, and I was invited by the Palestinians to the opening of the airport in the Ania. Just so, and yes, it was 2009. I was involved also in the decision to bomb part of the airport as part of the conflict there. But then again, because the Hamas took control of this area and was clearly our enemy and threatening Israel and firing rockets at Israel for so many years. So it was again a legitimate, we've been in an ongoing conflict, and within this ongoing conflict, it is okay to prevent them from having an airport that could enable them to get even more military equipment and the weapons to fight us. But that doesn't mean that we are the occupiers. Okay, so we don't have to make this again. The occupation is effective control. I think the 7th of October proves beyond any reasonable doubt, not that that's the standard, that we don't have effective control in Gaza. So we don't have those obligations. As I said, we do have obligations to the civilians of the enemy, and that is that we cannot carry out actions, or we have to prevent cases of starvation. You're allowed to starve the enemy combatants and to have a siege, let's say, and they provide no water and the food, so they surrender or starve. That's okay. But if it's civilians, you cannot starve the civilian population. And there is an obligation to allow not to give yourself, but to allow the entry of aid, humanitarian consignments by a body like the ICRC or other kinds of humanitarian aid providers, and Israel is doing that. So we are providing again, what you need to provide is just what is needed for the military, for the survival of the population, and legally you can put conditions in order to ensure that this humanitarian aid goes to the civilians and not to the combatants of the enemy. We know that Hamas tries to and comes and takes whatever is entered, even if it's meant for the civilians, they take control over it for their forces. And still Israel does allow this humanitarian aid to enter. Israel is not, it's against Israel's interest that there's a humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip. This would, again, beyond the fact that we don't want civilians in Gaza to die. I think civilians in Gaza are hostages of the Hamas. We have our hostages who are real hostages, cruelly treated, I hope not. But the other civilians in Gaza are also kinds of hostage of the Hamas, who is using them and risking their lives all the time in order to achieve this religious idea of cleansing the state, the Palestine from the Jews. But we don't, that's not our aim, and we don't want a humanitarian catastrophe. It's also against our interest. It would limit our freedom of action. So we are providing the humanitarian basic needs, and we are trying to have conditions to see that it goes to the civilians and not to the enemy forces. We are not allowing at the moment the entry of fuel, of solar, diesel. We have no obligation under the laws of war to do that, to provide that. And that goes immediately to the Hamas for its military. We know they already robbed the UNRWA they took, and UNRWA put a tweet and immediately deleted it after a while that they came and robbed a significant amount of fuel that was meant for the hospitals, for the hospital generators. They took it for their military purposes, and they don't have any shortage of fuel at the moment. They are just taking it and solar, and gas. They're using it for the military operations instead of giving it to the people for the generators and for civilian needs and for the hospitals.
We had a question from Joel asking you to define genocide, because it's used so often in different contexts on both sides. What would be a helpful, useful definition and perhaps source for that body of law?
So unfortunately, I don't have it now in the top of my mind, but you can find it in the Rome Statute, the Rome Statute that you have also the Convention on Genocide, the crime of genocide. You also have in the Rome Statute, genocide is one of the crimes. And I don't have the exact wording in my head, but it is when the actions are meant to exterminate a significant group because of a certain identity, and in this case, it's the Jews or Israelis, even if it's in part of a country, and if that is the aim, then it enters into the definition of genocide. Again, I'm sorry that I'm not accurate enough. I don't have it in front of me, but there was a very interesting, I can point to a very interesting analysis of Professor Dr. Orlin, I think in Opinio Juris. Opinio Juris is a blog, a legal blog that is usually not very favorable to Israel. And there someone analyzed the crimes of the Hamas, including why this is would fall into the definition of genocide. And I can send afterwards to Ruby the link to these articles. There's been a few articles already explaining why this also falls into the definition of genocide.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions that are sort of specific technical like that, just to gain information on sources. So maybe afterwards we can provide everyone with a couple of links to sources that are helpful. Let's talk about the distinction. There was an early question about some of the rhetoric that came out of Hamas, making all Israelis legitimate military targets because of the reserve army. Is there anything in international law? Could you point to the international legal response to that?
Well, no, you can target civilians only if they are directly participating in hostilities. Maybe in a certain, you can say if people are already on the way to become enlisted into the military, on their way to their reserve duty, they could also be a lawful target. Again, the Hamas, you could say that babies are going to be one day fighters. Yes, well, clearly that's not the law. And so again, these technical yes, you could say if they would target only soldiers and young people on their way to their reserve duty and would be very careful not to harm civilians beyond the collateral damage of this, then we could maybe discuss, what enters into the definition. But since they are targeting civilians all the time beyond the brutality, and I think you heard the stories, but I don't want to repeat, the torture. They tortured children in front of their parents. They tortured parents in front of their children. Torture. I don't want even to give you the examples because it's pictures that I have in my mind that keep me awake at night. And this is taking a pregnant woman and tearing her belly and taking baby out of. That's not combatant to be. So yes, you have definitions of what enters into the wider definition of combatants. It's less relevant when we're talking about the Hamas and the way they are applying the law or not applying the law.
Yeah. So that actually raises a question one of our viewers was asking about. There's a conundrum that terrorists, by almost definition, are not seeking to follow the law. So there's an asymmetry between one force that is flaunting the rules, right? Putting civilians at harm in order to protect themselves, attacking civilian populations openly. Can you talk about, because I know you've been there, you've been advising, and you have your successor is now advising active operational forces on what they can do, what they can't do on a 24/7 basis, likely. Can you talk about what that, what that's like, how you ultimately apply a law to an active situation where the other side is not playing by the rules, not playing by the laws? How are you able, and I know you talked about why that's important that the IDF does this and that there is a permanent organ of the IDF that makes those kind of distinctions, but can you share a little bit of what that looks like and what, without talking about specifics of the current campaign, but why it is that you think that is important for Israel to continue to do so, and what the costs are?
Yes, it's not that only that they are not abiding by the law; they are using the law against us, and the world is captured by this, and then we get all this illegitimacy, all this criticism from the world. The UN agencies, some of them have condemned only Israel. They haven't even condemned the Hamas, or they said like one little sentence that says nothing about both sides. So it's very frustrating. It's difficult. I must say that in the past it was easier for me. I was a legal advisor. One of my jobs was to tell commanders no. I always said, the more I shout at them, the more they respect me, and put them there. And I must say today there's this feeling in Israel, the sentiment that really, why should we abide by the rules when we're facing this kind of, in our view, kind of Nazi entity at the moment? And also this feeling of frustration because the people in Gaza were cheering and giving out sweets to all these murderers when they came back with the kidnapped Israelis and children, and after sending all the pictures of what they did, so they knew exactly what they are celebrating. But revenge is not a plan. It won't. If we go down that path, I think it will be. I don't want our soldiers to be going out butchering Palestinian children because that's what they did to us. So I think we have to maintain the upper moral stand. And it also is important for us from our allies. We know that it's important for the US. The US is a very important ally. So it's important for us. And internally, it is also important for our alliances. And we have to be strong. And it's difficult today in Israel to feel empathy to the. I always felt empathy to the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, even when I was in the military, involved in decisions that I knew would impact them. I would always remind myself they are people, they're human beings, and I still do. I still think that many of them don't really like the Hamas. They can't, of course, say anything. There's no freedom of speech in Gaza. But yes, do I feel less empathy than before? Yes, I must say so. But again, it's not. It's difficult to be a democratic state that wants to retain liberal values. We've been protesting for 8 months about that in a neighborhood where those values are not at all relevant to our enemies. But we don't want to become like them. So I guess that's my answer. It's not an easy one. I mean, we all have our very strong feelings at the moment.
Barbara's asking a very basic question that I think that we need to put out there. What are the repercussions for breaking international law? You talked about why a moral country would do that. We talked about the fact that the terrorists don't feel any obligation to adhere to this, and they flout it to their advantage. There are several questions saying, are there, other than the United Nations, are there venues in which that are, likely to achieve an outcome that's more equitable or just than just sort of a political pile-on that Israel's used to at the United Nations?
So again, the one level is the intrinsic one, as I said before. We want to retain our moral values. The second is our allies and the fact that we want to have the support, mainly of the US, but also others, UK, the EU, and it is important there that they and for them it's also an important issue. So it's important for us to that they know that we are respecting the laws. The relevant law, and there is also the level of the potential criminal cases. We have an open criminal investigation in the International Criminal Court already on all crimes committed in all war crimes or crimes against humanity, or crimes that are under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court carried out since the 13th of June 2014. Which means that and it's an open-ended, so it means that everything that is happening now could also be investigated. Potentially, they can issue arrest warrants that have to be respected by the countries that are members of the court. It's 123 countries. So this could also be something that we would face. But I don't think that's the most. I think that's not the main motivation today. I mean, people are not operating in a certain way or not because they are afraid that they will eventually be prosecuted in the ICC. At least that's not my impression. So it's more the other two arguments, but this is also a concern that we have.
There's a question about whether or not Israel has actually called for Hamas to surrender.
That's my idea that I am now developing, and I think that I don't think it's a feasible solution, but I think it's important to put it on the table, because I think mainly in the international discourse, the idea is all the time that everything is in the hands of Israel. I mean, the suffering of the Palestinians, the only one that can stop what's happening now in Gaza is Israel. And I think it is important to point out, no, there's another party that can stop the suffering that is happening now to the people in Gaza, and that is Hamas. If it decides to surrender, it can stop. We don't want to do anything to the civilians. If we get our hostages back, if it surrenders its weapons, if it surrenders its leadership, allows for a transformation where other Palestinians that are not aiming at destroying the state of Israel go in and with international component. I mean, there could be a whole plan of how to improve the situation in Gaza, that all the money that will go into the reconstruction will go to the reconstruction of the civilian buildings and not to the reconstruction of the military capabilities. Israel would be very happy to join this kind of plan. Some of us in Israel would add also a kind of moving forward in the resolution of the wider conflict, also in the West Bank. Here there is, I'm not saying, internal different positions within the Israeli politics. I personally come from the peace camp. Tomorrow I was supposed to be meeting Palestinians in a tractor in Europe. So I believe that would also be a good outcome if we managed also to move forward to find something more stable. But yes, the Hamas could surrender, and I think that's the point that needs to be made when people say it's all about Israel. No, it's another actor here.
Now, some of the Hamas leadership we know is in the Gulf and in other places. There are questions about prospects for extradition, prospects for what that aspect of the war might look like.
I think, well, they're in Qatar mainly, and I don't think there's much prospects. I think the international, at the moment, there's a lot of sensitivity around Qatar. Qatar has been funding the Hamas. It's a part of the problem, of course, but still at the moment, because of the hostages, it's a delicate issue because you still need some kind of channel to discuss the issue of the hostages. But I think, and we didn't talk a lot, but I know that Amos Yadin talked about the wider geopolitical aspects of this is all part. We have to see it in this wider context of the Iran and its spoilers, and the Hezbollah and the Shia militias, and Russia also, that is also involved in supporting the Hamas and Iran. So I think if we manage to go to another stage of redefining what's happening in the region, and then Qatar also should be part of this rearrangement, because it is also a disruptive actor. But of course, it's complicated. There are also other U.S. considerations here, so it's complicated. I think, and I think in general, and I saw the question about the occupation, genocide, apartheid, and I just want to say something about that. I think one of the frustrating things when what's happening in campuses in the U.S. and other places that are focused on the U.S. is really such a shallow discussion of the conflicts. I'm not talking about those that are anti-Semites and those that are pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, that really want Israel's destruction. But I'm talking about the others that don't really understand what is going and just buy into this narrative that it's good and evil, and somehow Hamas is on the side of the good guys and we are on the side of the evil guys, and they just don't understand, no understanding of the complexity of this conflict. I've been trying to, as I said, I started already in 1991, already in the Madrid conference. I was involved in the preparations. I've been since then trying to find solutions to this conflict. It's a very, very complicated conflict. There are real security concerns that Israel faces. We have had terror attacks. Every time Israel left an area, what killed the peace camp was the terror attacks of the 2000s, after Israel disengaged from or withdrew from the centers of the towns in the West Bank. We got a huge terror attacks every second day. A bus was exploding in Israel. We disengaged from Gaza. We got the Hamas and rockets, and now this. This makes us very apprehensive about the ability to withdraw from areas and have a Palestinian entity there that, and someone else mentioned the education system of Palestinians that are brought up to hate us, to see us as these villains, to all the time with this idea that we took their houses and they have to come back, this idea that UNRWA is also spreading all the time, and of keeping this refugee issue and of dehumanization of Jews. So this is what we have to face, and this is a big part of the Palestinian population. I have Palestinian friends, so I know it's not all of them, but it is a considerate part. The Hamas has become more popular now after what they did. So it's not an easy conflict to solve. It's not that Israel will just withdraw from back to the green line and everything is solved. As I said, even if we do that for the Hamas, that's also not enough, because we have to withdraw to the 48 lines and go back to wherever we came from. I actually come from here. When you see the rise in anti-Semitism around the world, I doubt whether the world really wants the Jews to come back or to go to all these other countries. So it's really much more complicated than just ending the occupation by Israel. And there's no apartheid. And the Israeli Arabs are, by the way, they are Bedouins that were murdered by the Hamas, including a woman that was that was clearly Muslim, and a baby, a Bedouin. There are Bedouins that were kidnapped by the Hamas, other Arabs also that were killed. They didn't spare their own. They wouldn't spare, if they managed to conquer us, they wouldn't spare the Israeli Palestinians. That would be much too liberal for the Hamas. So this is not just even about us, the Jewish part of the country. This is about the whole of Israel that they want to conquer and change, and we are not going to let them do that.
Amen to that. Colonel Baruch, thanks so much for really, we only hit the tip of the iceberg of the many questions, but I think from surveying both the questions and the reactions, you provided a great deal of content. We'll make available to anyone who wants it. You covered a lot of ground, and we'll look for a couple of links that might be helpful for people as they're following this. Unfortunately, as you explained, not only is it not going to be any easier to resolve the bigger issues here, but the very substantial challenges that the military is currently facing, and are ones that we know the IDF is, as much as they were surprised by this outbreak, are now in a place where they are doing what they've been trained to do, and to do so in a manner that is lawful and is focused on the outcome of eliminating the military threat that Israel has been facing and has been unleashed after this horrific massacre on October 7th. We also know that Israelis, yourself included, your own family, are experiencing real time the terror and trauma of terrorists. And at AIFL, we want to extend our thoughts and prayers to all of our Israeli friends who are going through this very, very difficult period. Our next program on November 1st will be with a group that we've hosted previously, Natal, that has expertise in dealing with trauma. And we hope that this resource, which we know that is unfortunately been utilized by many different communities in Israel, not only the border communities, but throughout Israel's history, that Israel does have, unfortunately, expertise in dealing with trauma. So we invite our audience and others who care about this topic and about what our Israeli friends and family are going through now to join us again this Wednesday, November 1st, for a program that will focus on how the Israeli Amutah, the nonprofit, Natal, is providing resources at this very moment to Israelis in distress. And we are here in the United States at a regular hour, but because of daylight savings time in Israel, reminder that it'll be 6 p.m. in Israel, 12 noon here in Israel. And I'll ask our friends from around the world to check their clocks and their daylight savings policies to make sure that you can all join us. For now, we'll say thanks and wish health and safety to all our friends in harm's way. And he wrote until Wednesday.